Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the 5 mindsets of a future fit leader. Now, I'm really excited to talk about this topic today, so let's just get straight into it, shall we?
Great.
So, my name's Thomas, and I work here in the research and product team, and my role involves supporting the thought leadership research project here. And that's making sure that our offering is evidence-based and up-to-date with the latest thinking in sport and business psychology. And also it involves challenging the latest thinking in these domains as well. And that's why I'm really excited to share what we've found as a research team over the last few months, because I'm really fascinated in terms of the way that the world is shaping up. And there's going to be so much impact now and for future generations to come. And so I'm really interested to know, what does this mean, and specifically, what does this mean for leaders?
Great.
It's also a pleasure for me to be joined today by Paul Jewett-Harris. Paul, can you tell the listeners a bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Paul Jewett-Harris. I lead our consulting team at Lane 4. I'm also a consultant. Last couple of days, Thomas, I've been out working with our clients on leadership as a topic. And I guess at the back of my mind, this is a big topic. This is happening. This is what we're facing at the moment. So I'm delighted, first of all, to have your background and your backing as a research person, but also as a practitioner, starting to think about, what does this really mean for our customers? What does it mean for the buyers of our services? And how can we help organizations to really keep their performance, improve their performance through this research and through the work we do with them?
Fantastic. So if we take a look at our objectives for today. So first, we're going to take a look at the overarching leadership megatrend. So that's a little bit that I touched on there, around the way that the world is shaping up now and for future generations. Also, we're going to look at mindset, what a mindset is and why do they matter. Then from there, we're going to take a look at 3 of the 5 mindsets that we found from our research. And we're going to look at 3 because there's a couple that we go into more detail in a white paper that we've written. And you'll receive some follow-up messages about how you can get hold of that later on. And then we're going to specifically look at how you can cultivate these mindsets within your organization, and specifically how to cultivate them and develop them in your senior leaders. If we want to prepare our leaders for the future, we really need to understand the environment that they're going to be operating in. And our research found that there are 14 megatrends that are shaping the environment now and for years to come. And as you can see on the slide here, we've got 8 of the megatrends, and that's because we could only fit so many on one slide, just to give you an idea of how many there are. And it's really important for me to stress that these are trends. They're not predictions. These things are gaining momentum right now as we speak. And that there are 14 tells us that the emerging business context is not only about preparing our leaders for the digital age or the impact of the environment, or let's say globalization alone. There are actually multiple trends that are all converging together at the same time.
The one thing that strikes me when I look at that, Thomas, is the political volatility one.
Right.
And on a day when I would imagine everyone's going out and voting today.
Yes, I'm doing that this evening.
Great, well done. And the political volatility, from that right the way across to what we're witnessing globally in terms of the trends we're noticing in the destabilization of some political structures that we thought were there for good type of thing. So to me, that is a real example of how things are changing.
Yeah, and just even picking up on that, there's so much uncertainty. It's very hard for us to predict what even might happen within the political situation at the moment.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to go over all 14, but I just thought I'd give you a little snapshot of a couple, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about here. So if I take a look at the advancing technology trend. So Ray Kurzweil, who is Google's Director of Engineering, and he's got a great track record for making accurate predictions about the future. So he predicts that by 2045, artificial intelligence will surpass human intelligence. So this throws up questions for me around, what does this mean for business? What does this mean for society? How about the ethical implications of this? And also, what about the growing demand for food, water and energy? So the population at the moment stands at 7.5 billion. By 2050, that's predicted to grow to 9.7 billion. And if I get you to think about it in a different way, that's like adding an India and a China to the population right now.
Amazing.
And this is set in the context of the Earth at the moment, where people are using 30% more resources than the Earth can replenish year on year. So there's a real grow and increase for demands of natural resources. So yes, what does this all mean? So now the question moves from what will happen in the future, what's happening now, to how do we equip our leaders to adapt to this environment? And for us, from a research team, the best way for us to find this out was to ask the leaders who are thriving in this context. And that's what we did. We interviewed 17 global leaders who had won awards for disruption, innovation, and future thinking. And we were specifically interested to find out the mindsets that were driving their performance. Now, before we go into those mindsets in more detail, we're really interested to hear from you. How would you define a mindset, and what does a mindset mean to you? And you'll see at the bottom right of your screen, there's a chat box there. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on these couple of questions, I guess. And then Paul and I will just discuss that a bit further and give our views on that as well.
So I think this is interesting, especially after the last couple of days that I've had, Thomas, working with our clients. And I think often there is a propensity to be talking about skills, talking about capabilities. However, to me, it's absolutely critical to think about the mindset, because when people are in the right mindset, if you like, that will then drive them to develop the skills, develop the capabilities, if you like. The other thing that it makes me think of are prevailing organizational mindsets.
Okay.
So,
what's the difference there?
Well, if you think about certain, organizations, enterprises have a prevailing mindset, often underpinned by the culture. Therefore, the ability of an individual with a certain mindset to be able to thrive where there is almost like a different way of looking at things.
Wow.
Healthy to a certain degree, because that can create change, but also can be quite difficult. So I think that's something we need to consider, not only the individual mindset, but what is almost the cultural mindset of the organization.
It sounds like there's quite a tension there as well.
There can be a tension, but also it can be a great enabler when we get people lined up, and when
Fantastic.
people can be congruent with that.
How about have we got any answers coming through?
Yes, what we've got here is from Jenny, yes, and in Lodger. It's linked to how you see the world and how it affects everything you do. Yes, absolutely. I think absolutely mindset underpins our behavior, which as leaders, as the people who you are developing in your organizations, their mindset will be affecting their behavior. That behavior will be affecting the performance of the people they lead, which will directly correlate to performance. Second thing, mindset is about the inherent way of thinking that a person has that it impacts. Yeah, absolutely. And actually what I would say in throughout the years, our approach to leadership has been, how do you engender the right attitudes, the right mindsets in your people? And that starts with the mindsets of the leaders. So specifically the things I'm thinking about is job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and trust and loyalty to the leader. And that comes from the mindset of the leader. So I think that's pretty important to consider.
Fantastic, and that aligns really nicely with our definition here at Lane 4 of mindset. So we would define mindset as the beliefs, the attitudes, and the values that filter the way that we look at the world. And so I heard you say there around the behaviour and skills as well, Paul.
Yeah.
And for me, this is a really key thing, because mindset and behaviour is inseparable.
Yes.
And actually, going back to the megatrends I was talking about earlier, I've read a lot of reports when we were first starting this research project around the skills that leaders need to adapt to some of these trends. But actually, they really need to raise their awareness of the mindset that drives this effective action.
Yeah, just one thing on that, Thomas. It's just literally occurred to me as we were talking there. When you talked about the inseparability of behavior and mindset, of course, one distinction is that we see behavior.
Right.
We don't see mindset.
Yes.
We interpret mindset through behavior. So if I was to jump a little bit ahead in terms of what we need from our leaders, what we need to develop in our leaders, is the ability to get curious, actually, so that you can not be guessing mindset through behavior.
Right, okay.
But actually we're inquiring about mindset, and that allows us to have more insight, which links a little bit to what we're going to talk about later on.
Fantastic. As you can see here, we've got the 5 mindsets that we identified that the 17 future thinking leaders, the mindsets that they used to adapt to this emerging business environment. And before I go into, or we discuss the mindsets in more detail, I really need to quickly bring up the idea of paradox. So paradox often refers to two things that are both contradictory, yet at the same time they're integrated. So on the face of it, they might seem completely different, but one can't be true without the other. And paradox is really important in complex, ambiguous, and constantly changing environments where leaders feel like there are competing tensions and they're being pulled from left to right. And that's because the research shows that leaders who embrace paradoxical thinking outperform those who don't.
Yep.
That's one thing, the paradoxical thinking. But actually what was really fascinating from our research was that the future thinking leaders didn't just use paradoxical thinking. The mindset, so their beliefs, attitudes and values, they were actually paradoxical themselves.
Yep.
And so Paul and I are going to discuss these mindsets, discuss what they are, what this means for your leaders and your organization, and also how you can develop these mindsets in your leaders.
Yeah, that links to a question we've just had, actually, because what I'm noticing
lovely.
is, as we're talking, is I can see the chat box, Thomas, I know you can't quite see it. We've had a question about how do you develop the mindsets? How do you shift the mindset when that isn't aligned? So I'm going to mark that question, and I think it was Graham who said that. I'm going to come back to that question a little bit later, if that's all right. So how do you change your mindset when it doesn't align with an organization? So perfect. Thomas, we'll come back to that.
Perfect. So let's take a look, shall we? So if we take a look at politically virtuous. So politically virtuous leaders hold the mindset that they need to act in a way that is aligned with their values. They've got to do the right thing. Whilst at the same time, they acknowledge that to enhance performance, they need to be shrewd in the circumstances. So they lead with their values, but they aren't trapped by circumstance. If we look at confidently humble leaders, they hold the mindset that in order to achieve results, they need to inspire confidence, whilst at the same time they acknowledge that they can't achieve things on their own. They believe in themselves so much that they're comfortable asking other people for help.
Right.
And so, as I said earlier, these are a couple that we have much more detail in the white paper, but we're going to focus on the following three and look at how you develop those, what they mean. If we take a look at ruthlessly caring, so ruthlessly caring leaders, they hold the mindset that to achieve performance, there will come a time when they need to make a decision that has a human impact, whilst also acknowledging that success doesn't have to come at a cost to people. So for them, compassion is much more than being nice.
I think this is really relevant and it's so consistent in a lot of the organisations I spend my time with. And if I was to use an example, working with an organisation, Sainsbury's, a few years ago, they had a programme called Making Sainsbury's Great Again. And a part of that was an element they called tough love. And it's been used quite a lot now, so it might be a little bit cliche, but I think this idea that actually sometimes we have to be resolute or ruthless in the fact that we're going to have one of these conversations.
Okay.
In other words, we won't shy away from that conversation, but the way we have the conversation is caring. So we need to have it. We definitely need to have it. We need to give feedback. We might need to have difficult conversations. And sometimes we might have to make tough decisions, difficult decisions that have a human consequence. But actually caring about how we do that and being really clear that that's what we're doing, I think is really important. I think sometimes people put off making tough decisions. And to me, that's a mistake, because what's happening there is it's almost misplaced benevolence.
Right.
In some ways, we're not caring because it's going to be far harder if this is left, if someone doesn't receive the feedback, for example. And to me, it's a true trait of leadership is taking a tough decision, but doing it in a way that allows us to sleep at night.
Right.
Because after all, the underpinning thing about leadership is it's not the easy decisions, right?
No.
It's the tough decisions, and ones where there aren't absolutely clear, true, real, right answers.
Yes.
So if I was thinking about how I would encourage you to develop the leadership for your people in this, it's about having the skill, but most importantly, the will to be able to have those tough conversations, to be able to have the conversations in such a way that they deliver the message, but they don't inhibit performance along the way.
Right. And what really stood out for me there was around the care around actually who are you serving? Because
Yes.
it sounds like in certain situations, if you're avoiding that conversation, actually then are you thinking more about yourself than the people that you're leading?
Yeah. I've got another question which we're going to come back to in a minute, which is what is the biggest driver of a mindset? And I think I might need a bit of notice to think about that, because there are so many things that drive mindset.
Wow.
And I go to culture, I go to leader behavior, but where I go to initially is how clear are we about what are we trying to achieve? And it's not about dictating a mindset, but what is the enabling mindset that would allow that to happen? So whoever's put that question through, I think Suzanne, I'll be interested in a little bit more context maybe there. If you could give us that, then we can maybe answer that question a little bit more completely.
Fantastic. So then let me just quickly talk to everyone about how these leaders show up then, the ruthlessly caring leaders. So they really care about people. Human connection is really important to them, and they treat people with respect. At the same time, they're really challenging. And as Paul said as well, they offer feedback in tough emotional situations.
Correct.
Now let's take a look at ambitiously appreciative. Ambitiously appreciative leaders hold the mindset that to achieve lofty, ambitious heights, they need to be both relentless and determined. Whilst at the same time they appreciate they recognize that it's important to find a way to be sustainable. They understand what it takes to make sustainable impact.
Great. And when I think about this ambitiously appreciative, ambition to me is synonymous with leadership. You know, there's nothing like having a goal to go for and having an ambition. It's quite personal actually when you think about I've got this ambition. To me, the appreciative bit is the idea that we need to have two things really. First of all, a sense of appreciation of what it will take to get there. In other words, what it will take to make it happen, especially considering the human cost or the human, what it's going to take from a human perspective, and also an appreciation of the past. So I think very often what can happen in change situations is that we lose a sense of what it took to get us here today. And of course, all of those great things people are very proud of. So if we can in some way appreciate the past and value it, but also mark the fact that there are some things we're going to need to let go of. So the capability to be able to work through transition. So what I'd be encouraging you to do in thinking about developing your leaders is a way of thinking about goals, for example, as an example, in a well-formed way. What will the ambition give us? What will we lose? What will we have to let go of to make that ambition happen? And value that, appreciate that. What resources do we need to make it happen? And finally, this point about sustainability. How sustainable is it? How do we create and build sustainability into this? So to me, that you've got the ambition, but be appreciative of both of those things, and to help your leaders to think about it in that sort of way.
Yeah, and this really brings to the fore of my mind actually the idea of paradox here, because I feel in terms of straying too far into one or too far into the other, and then not being able to drive the performance that you want to see. So I can just see if you're full drive, full ambition, and you're pursuing everything, and you're not actually thinking about the little steps that get there, or how do we make this sustainable. I can see how that can slip over into burnout. Yeah, absolutely. Or on the other side, if you're only appreciative, actually, where are you going?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, Paul touched on that a bit there in terms of some of the things that that your leaders would need to develop. But if I take a look at the leaders from our study, how they showed up, ambitiously appreciative leaders are highly driven. They're never satisfied, but they're also resilient. They set demanding objectives. They celebrate performance as well as attainment. So I think that's what you touched on there, Paul. It's around actually the other key milestones along the way. It's not just the one goal that they're looking at. And they also appreciate the things that matter to people.
I think, can we just touch on that a little bit about appreciating performance or celebrating performance? Often I find in organizations, people will have a post-mortem on why something went wrong.
Right.
How often do we say, let's think about what we did well when things go well, so that we can repeat those things? And I think what that takes into account is almost like a sort of psychological well-being. When people know they've done things well, they're able to repeat them, but also they feel good about themselves, gives them more confidence, gives them more self-belief, and enables to sustain us when those times are more challenging, when it's more difficult to perform.
Fantastic. Let's move on to responsibly daring. Responsibly daring leaders hold the mindset that you need to be sensible when pursuing your purpose or the things that you believe in. At the same time, they recognize that everything is worth trying and that everything is possible. They take responsibility for their inventive actions.
Great. And if I think about this, it just so happens I'm working with an organization at the moment which deals with critically high-risk situations where there is, without any shadow of a doubt, a desperate need to have compliance and process. And they are brilliant at it, extremely good. The danger is that everything gets treated in that way. In other words, they even treat people situations in that way. And this in turn leads to overly safe decision making in everything and almost a paralysis in the organization, a stuckness. For example, decisions need to be made and have multiple levels of sign-off, which in the end means that people can't be daring because almost the compliance draws us so far into a need to cover one's back that actually nothing ever happens. So I guess the critical thing here is to be able to develop the ability to not apply the same thinking to everything, not treating people in the same way that you would treat high-risk situations.
Right.
Okay,
so very situation specific.
I mean, if we could go back to almost situational leadership, but it also requires a diversity of thinking and an ability to challenge, and actually to have that challenge rewarded and that ability to do that, because otherwise innovation and invention are stifled. So it reminds me a little bit of this whole thing, far from agreed, far from certain, the Stacey work. And so the ability to be able to operate in that space, which is not quite in chaos, but which is not also in ordinary management. And also developing the capability in your leadership to appreciate how they might be creating little mini-me's of themselves, how their biases might be inhibiting the value of diverse thinking, and the degree to which actually we're open and welcoming that diverse thinking, because that really is the thing that allows us to be daring, whilst at the same time making sure that the parts of our business that need to be absolutely risk compliant work.
Fantastic. And I'm really looking forward to this next bit, because Paul, you're going to talk to us about the underpinning capabilities. So we've got the mindsets already, but actually how do we cultivate these in our leaders? How do we actually get our leaders to play out in the environment that they're working in?
Sure, and I guess what I was thinking here, Thomas, was that the great research you've done, I know it's relevant, I know it's from now. I would imagine sometime in the future there might be other things that are happening. As we know, change never stops. So I started to think about, well, if I was wanting to develop the leadership in my organization, what would be the things that would be enduring? What are some of the things which would enable that they to embrace whatever the other paradoxes are that are coming? So I think the first one is I'm going to headline this, be able to tell the story. So if this is confusing for the leadership of the organization, then it's definitely going to be confusing for the followers in the organization. Right. So we as leaders need to be able to get this straight in our own heads. Now, that's not saying exactly how it's going to be, because of course we don't know, but actually be able to tell the story in such a way that it gives people a sense of understanding without nailing everything down. And what I do know is that sometimes in organizations, people are reluctant to put themselves out there until they've got all the facts.
Right.
I don't think you can do that in this situation.
No,
so that's
so much going on all at the same time, isn't
it? Help your people to be comfortable with a bit of ambiguity by demonstrating that you're comfortable with it the same. Yourself rather. The second one is the ability to have the right conversation. This is about dynamics in the room, in the decision-making rooms, in the forums, in the conversations that you have. This is the way we have the conversation. Too many times I witness organizations having conversations where advocacy overpowers inquiry. People come in stating their position and don't inquire about interests. So my suggestion here, this is about the way we're having conversations, balancing inquiry and advocacy, focusing on interests, not positions, balancing the movers in a conversation to the opposers, to the bystanders and the followers. And perhaps that means leaving our ego at the door, being prepared to walk into a room, prepared to change our mind. Third one, underpinning all of this really is develop emotional intelligence. We have to navigate situations here where people are going to be unsettled. They're going to be having all sorts of threat responses. We need to be able to help people through that, to go through transition. And finally, the ability to focus on the organization's resilience. And that's us as leaders, us developing our leaders to be able to anticipate, to notice what's happening, to anticipate the consequences, to be able to have the right conversations, to organize and coordinate around from it, to learn from it. And this all requires a degree of psychological safety where people can feel as if they can voice without fear. So quite a lot in there and quite a demand, but then that's the job, isn't it? That's the leadership role.
Yeah, and what really stands out for me there is people. I think if I look at the 5 mindsets that we've spoken about previously, actually it's one thing to understand the paradox within each one, but actually when you go out there into the real world, you're going to be connecting with other people. Absolutely. And that's how it plays out. Yeah,
it is. So Thomas, we've got a few minutes left, and I've got three points here that I think would be helpful for us to focus on. The first question was about what if someone's mindset is not aligned to the organization's. And immediately where I went, well, what happens if someone's values is not aligned to an organization?
Interesting.
So people have choice about whether or not their mindset fits with the organization. And what I'd say is there are limits. So people, it might be that actually the mindset is a little bit off. It might be that actually it's about the mindset they have about a learning mindset, for example. That can be changed. That can be developed. And I'm not talking about forcing people to do this, but giving them an opportunity to think what would happen if, for example, there was a different mindset. If I think about when we're developing coaching capability, the first thing we challenge is, what's your belief that people have the answers within them? By running a simple exercise, people realize people do have the answers within them. So that's a shift in mindset. So there's one. The second question was, what's the biggest driver of a mindset? And wow, I mean, I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to think about that. A couple of things I jotted down is what's rewarded in the organization, what's valued, what is someone's values, what is their ambition. All of these things will form their mindset, their mental model, if you like. So I think getting to understand that is a really important part. And then the final question was, how do we, I think it's a fantastic question, by the way, how do we avoid, Andy, how do we avoid middle ground? Because this all could sound like actually never really making a decision. This could always have one or the other, both and there's a lot of talk about that. And I guess my immediate response is about authenticity.
Right, okay.
Actually, is how can you really be clear about how we're navigating these two things? So if I go back to the tough love, or if I go back to the ruthlessly caring, being able to actually describe that, it's not, I am definitely, if you like, executing the challenging conversation, but I am doing it in a way which cares for the individual. So for me, that's not middle ground, it's both and. So I think this isn't compromise, this is both and. I hope that answers the questions on that.
Fantastic, thank you, Paul. If we take a look at a summary in terms of what we've spoken about today, we know that there's an emerging business environment that leaders need to adapt to. We also have discussed that leaders need to adopt both sides of the paradox of these 5 mindsets, and they need to be able to develop those in themselves. And finally, we've spent the last portion talking about how to cultivate your leaders' mindsets and the enduring underpinning capabilities that will make this more effective as well.
Can I just have one final word there, Thomas? Sorry to throw this right in at the end. What it made me think of was yesterday I was working with a group of people who were talking about emotional intelligence, and someone said, can it be developed? And I said, well, when you pay attention to it, you start to learn about it. And it reminded me of that exercise where they show a video of people throwing a basketball around, and then a gorilla walks in and beats their chest. So if I was to say to you, the gorilla's going to walk on, you'd see it. But in the same way, if we're thinking about this, then we'll be able to work with it and we'll be able to develop capability about it.
Fantastic, and that really aligns to our definition of mindset as well, because it's filtering the way that you see the world. You could have one mindset and not see the gorilla, and have another one, and you see it crystal clear.
Absolutely. Thanks, Thomas.
Now, I know we're getting to the end of the webinar. We'd like to just ask if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. We'd love to get back to you. And if we can't get back to all of them, Paul and I would love to take them offline and email you some responses too.
Great. Thanks, Thomas. I've really enjoyed it myself.
Me too. Thanks a lot. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.